Hi everyone, I'm Satine and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to finish, put on, and wear the red dress from the Luhrman film Moulin Rouge. You may have watched my last video where I drafted and sewed together the bodice. Today we're going to sew the skirt and the bow, which of course is finishing the dress. In general, I just have such a huge obsession with skirts of the 1890s. In my opinion, the skirt shape from this era is just one of the prettiest ones out there. They flare out in a really aesthetic way, and I just really love it and find myself going back to making these skirts over and over again. The 1890s, man, it just gets to me. And a really cool thing about these skirts is that they do this with only one petticoat. No hoops, no hoop wires, no panniers, no crinolines, just a petticoat. And I think that's just magical. As usual, let's start by studying the movie skirt. She wears this in 2 songs as well as a getting dressed scene, which honestly is so awesome since this is way more than I usually have to work with. For instance, I have made dresses from movies that appear for all of approximately 6 seconds. This was really a treat. Let's look at some of these scenes now. Like this one going up and down stairs, it's so helpful to see the side view as well as the sweep of the skirt. Just for one day. Also, the scene of Nicole Kidman holding a note and the camera panning away is really, really lovely, and I just feel like I get such a great idea of the overall shape of the skirt. Leave all this to yesterday. And of course, this one. And this one was also really helpful too. And I'll drink all the time. And a bunch of others. The whole song is just like a tribute to this dress. Easy fool, I won't give in to you. Don't. I think I watched this movie around 50 times as a teenager in the early 2000s, and not once have I ever seen a petticoat peek out. Considering how long and trained the movie version is, that in no way means she didn't wear a petticoat underneath, and it certainly could have been built into the skirt. In fact, the museum website says that the skirt is lined with black polyester, but it doesn't say if it's a lining or a shell, or if it's a petticoat, or if it's just a flat line. It really doesn't say much about it. Personally, I'll probably wear my 1890s petticoat with mine to add to the fullness and the full 1890s look. You can see that the top of the skirt is a little more fitted than the bottom of the skirt, and especially when she's swirling around to turn to Sieg Ziedler, you really get a great idea of the skirt shape. I'm not saying that it's a mermaid skirt at all, even though I am saying that the bottom is more flared, and I think this is following the later 1890s trend of a more trumpet-shaped skirt, so to speak. This makes sense since I believe that this movie is set in the year 1899. From this line, you know, it's the end of the century. The end of the century! Now let's look at promo shots of the skirt in action, particularly the really famous Nicole Kidman Vogue shot. If you look at the skirt up close, it looks like a really heavy, thick Duchess fabric. The flimsier silk satins really just don't fold about in that manner. The way that it just rigidly bends just really suggests it's a really thick fabric. This reinforced my decision to use a double-faced silk Duchess for my version, by the way, rather than a single-faced. Now let's look at the skirt description at the Museum of Moss. They say this: matching red satin skirt, lined with black polyester and satin, fastens with hooks and eyes. A-line skirt constructed of 7 panels, with the back panels much longer than the front, creating a train at the center back. Down each side of the center back is a large, rounded, stiffened panel in red satin, lined with black satin. Stitch the skirt down the fastenings, which falls in 2 folds down to sharp points at the floor, creating the effect of a bustle. So what this tells me is that the skirt and the bow are in fact one piece, rather than what I initially assumed, which is that the bow is a separate piece which attaches to the skirt. While I do think this is a really cool and clever idea that the skirt was constructed in this manner, I personally decided to make mine with the bow as a separate piece just for my personal ease of use. It will make it easier for me to mix and match these pieces with other outfits. The skirt also has an insanely long train. I would say probably nearly 2 feet from looking at the 360 view at another museum. I personally do hate trains in real life. If you have ever gone to a ball with a gown that has a really long train, you'll know why. They get abused and trampled, and you find yourself frequently falling backwards because when you try to move forwards, it turns out someone was actually standing on your train the whole time, and now like it literally just propels you backwards. I actually remove trains from recreations all the time. That being said, I haven't been to a ball or a convention in over 2 years since the pandemic began, and I do think that the majesty of this particular train is one of the things that makes this gown so unforgettable. So I put my practical considerations aside and decided to make the gown with a long and fabulous train. Now, before I get started sewing up this gown, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, June's Journey. For those of you who have been following me for a while on Instagram, you know that I am a gamer, both of the tabletop and cell phone variety. Thanks to Morgan Donner, I've been an avid player of June's Journey for 2.5 years now, and I'm actually at level 386 and counting. I particularly enjoy playing this game because it's such a lovely way to relax when my hands are tired or I'm waiting for my embroidery machine to finish stitching something up. It combines several things that I absolutely love. Fun, casual gaming, pretty pictures, a historical 1920s setting, and a sassy female protagonist, and a concerted effort to include people of different diversities and backgrounds. So let's get to the game itself. June's Journey is a mystery game created by Wooga, with June and her friends always finding a new mystery or crime to solve. You help her by finding hidden objects in the different pictures. But on top of all this, it's also a landscaping game, and you get this adorable island to decorate, and as you get higher in the game, the island just gets prettier and prettier. The best part is that I can just play for a few minutes, like 10 minutes a day. And this lets me go forward in the game in a really fun manner. You can also be part of a society and you can do cool events to get fabulous prizes. It's just such a cute game. June's Journey is free to download and the link is available below in my descriptions. It's available on iOS and Android, pad or phone, however you prefer. Thank you so much, June's Journey, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to sewing the skirt itself. I decided to go with a double-faced silk satin in the perfect shade of red from New York designer fabrics. I needed 7.5 yards for my 5'4" 4.5 inch frame, but you may need more, especially if you're taller. Actual 1890s skirts are then flat-lined, often in a polished cotton, which is extraordinarily hard to get, so I'll be using just regular muslin. And then the bottom of the skirt is stiffened to give that floaty appearance. The stiffener they use in the past is frequently tarlatan, which today is used for printmaking, but I'll be using something else and I'll explain that later. We'll talk more about the bow when we get there, but it's also a lot of stiffening. But let's first talk about the skirt shape. After watching this movie a bunch of times again, I realized it really reminded me of the shape of the truly Victorian trumpet skirt pattern. As I said, a skirt that was extremely popular between the years of 1899 to 1905, and it can be seen in contemporary magazines such as the Delineator from this era. Just look at how many times it comes up even in the first few pages of this contemporary 1899 magazine. Per the museum description, the movie skirt has 7 gores, or pieces, to the skirt. And so does a trumpet skirt from Truly Victorian, so I was all about this. I have actually used this Truly Victorian pattern before, about 3 years back when I made my Art Nouveau skirt, and can attest that this is a fabulous pattern that goes together perfectly. So I just pulled out my old pattern and made a mock-up. As I said, I hate trains, so I had actually cut off the train from the original Art Nouveau skirt. Since I am literally using the same paper pattern, I have to add the train to the skirt. I did this by first ironing out the pieces, since it's been in storage for 3 years, and then copying the back piece and the side back piece to a piece of cotton muslin. I then used a 24-inch ruler and a pen and added in the train manually to the back. I added this to the side back and the back pieces. Please note that the front pieces are completely untouched. And I ended up making my train approximately 20 inches long. This is about as long a train as I could personally tolerate. I then cut up the pieces of the muslin and sewed it all together and then tried it on my dress form. Now, considering that this fabric has no stamina and ability to stand out on its own, and I didn't really help it out by not putting on a petticoat or even legs on my dress form, I think it's fabulous. I already loved it. Now, to be conscious of using every bit of fabric possible, as well as reduce the amount of waste and the amount of work I am actually doing, I decided to just use the cotton muslin as the lining for the skirt itself. And I find it generally works really, really well, to the point that I actually buy a certain muslin because it is my favorite to line skirts with. So I cut up the back skirt pieces and then used them as a pattern to cut out the final skirt in silk Duchess. Now, there is a lot of documentation from this era about how skirts in the 1890s had their fabulous floating shape. Basically, the secret to this is flatlining. You flatline it with a different fabric and then sew things onto the flatlining so it doesn't show on the outside, but you still have the stiffener and the shape. May I say, in the hospital setting, flatlining means something completely different than in the sewing world. It means that with your EKG, with its normal bumps signifying heart electricity, the voltage has gone to 0, meaning your heart has completely stopped. The vertical axis is voltage, by the way, and the horizontal axis is time. So if your line is no longer going squiggly up and down, or in other words, being completely flat, you are quote unquote flatlining, and it is time to start CPR. So it makes me honestly a little queasy every single time I say this word flatlining, but alas, as far as I can tell, there is no other phrase in the English language that means sewing two pieces of fabric of the identical shape together, right sides out, wrong sides together, along the edges on all sides, and then using that piece as one piece. So now, having given you that blood pressure increasing definition, let's go back to flatlining itself. I did this for all the pieces, no mean feat since the pieces are quite large, so there was a lot of ironing and pinning together. Now it was time to add the tarlatan. The historical method of sewing on tarlatan to just the lining and not the outer fabric is actually really time consuming. What I do instead is I cut out a piece of iron-on horsehair interfacing, and this one's by Pellon, around 8 to 10 inches wide, and then I iron it onto the bottom of the skirt. Now this iron-on glue is only on the flat lining and not on the exterior, so it really doesn't make any difference to what the outside of the skirt looks like. It just gives you fabulous support. So instead of about 6 to 8 hours to do the whole skirt, it took me about 15 minutes. For the back of the skirt, the train, where there is a lot of fabric to stabilize, I did not actually want to use the full horsehair interfacing since I thought it might be a little bit too stiff. For that, I just used regular medium weight Pellon iron-on interfacing. After I got a few of these pieces ironed on, I started sewing the pieces together. Afterwards, I ironed open the seams with some steam ironing. And then I sewed the side front to the side backs. Now, I wanted to add a pocket. I do love a good pocket in a ball gown. I chose to put mine in the back between the side back and the back piece, which I think will be completely covered up by the bow. To make my pockets, I cut out 4 trapezoids large enough to hold my cell phone and a small wallet in the same silk Duchess. I then sewed this 3 inches from the top on the side back and then onto the corresponding area on the back. I then sewed the back pieces to the side backs, stitching around the pocket. I then ironed the pocket towards the front and voila, I had a basic skirt including pockets. Now for the very back, I wanted to put in a placket. I used a placket pattern to cut out the piece, folded it in half right sides together, sewed one end shut and then turned it right side out and ironed it. I then sewed it to one of the back sides and now I had a placket where you can have a little bit of leeway for the hooks and eyes. I then added in the waistband by cutting out the waistband, folding 1/2 inch seam allowance down, and then stitching it to the top of the skirt, right sides together, raw edges together. I then folded the waistband along the middle and then hand stitched the waistband downwards. I sewed in some hooks and bars for the closures. Finally, I put this on with some 4-inch heels, figured out how long I wanted the hem to be, which for me was personally about 1/2 inch above the ground. I like the scant 1/2 inch because I just think it adds to that floating image. I then ironed the skirt edge and then hand stitched the hem. Here I used a whip stitch to sew it down only to the lining, about 8 stitches to the inch. Now the skirt could be technically called done. However, I love the idea of picking up my train for dancing. Sort of how Edith does it in Crimson Peak. By the way, good God, I want to create that yellow dress from that movie so much, including the embroidery, of course. And I didn't want any ugly stabilizer to show up. So for this, I got some black taffeta that I had in the house, very light and very thin, and I cut out around 3.5 feet of the bottom of the back piece and around 2.5 feet of the bottom of the back side pieces. And then I sewed these all 4 pieces together to make one long piece. Afterwards, I pinned this to the back 4 gores of the skirt along the bottom, wrong sides together, right sides out, and then hand stitch this to the lining. Now, this is purely aesthetic and doesn't have to be strongly adhered, so my stitching was fairly loose, maybe 4 to 5 stitches to the inch, and it only took me about 2.5 hours to stitch all of that down. And the skirt was completely done. Now let's start on the bow. I had an idea of playing with half circles with this one, and it's pretty long, so I made a mock-up to try it out, and I felt like it didn't quite make the bow full enough, so I did it again with 3/4 of a circle, and I thought that this was really full and I love the way it looks, so that's what I did. I then cut this out in red silk Duchess. Normally, I would line this in either a single-face silk Duchess or a cheaper silk taffeta. However, I did have 3 yards of double-face silk Duchess in my collection that I bought for the Anastasia gown before I switched over to a midnight blue, and it's just sitting there and it's complete. It needed to be used, so I decided to just use that instead. And can I just say, this bow is stupidly expensive at this point. Now, I didn't want to use iron-on horsehair stabilizer directly on the silk, since the glue would warp the shape of the silk itself. What I decided to do was use Luhrman horsehair stabilizer. Since the stabilizer wasn't wide enough, I cut it in 2 pieces and sewed it together to make it the one large piece. Of course, times 2, since each half of the bow will be made separately. I then pinned it to the black silk and stitched it together on all edges. I then sewed the red and the black together, right sides together, wrong sides out, leaving a 12-inch gap on the inside straight edge where I could turn it inside out. I clipped all the edge around 1 cut to each inch and then ironed all the edges down. The raw edges towards whichever side I want to be prettier, which in this case is the red. I then turned it inside out and then ironed the whole thing flat. Now I had a really good looking piece and I needed 2 of them, so I made 2. I stitched the 12-inch gap closed by hand using tiny stitches so that nothing would show, and then started playing with the 2 bow pieces on the back of the skirt. Once I had a skirt shape I loved, I stitched it in place on one piece and then the other, and then stitched the 2 pieces together. I hand stitched 3 bars and clips to keep the bow attached to the skirt, and the outfit was done. There you have it, the red gown from Moulin Rouge. Now Satine wears leather black gloves with hers, and you never see her shoes. I chose to wear mine with my black silk ones since black leather gloves are approximately $400 per pair, and even with the sponsorship, I am afraid I went slightly over budget with this one. And I still love it. Now to put it on. Of course, you start with makeup and hair. I love it. The whole outfit is so comfortable and I feel fabulous, beautiful, and dramatic wearing it. It's honestly a complete dream come true. So that's how I made the dress. I hope it's given you all the confidence to tackle all the dresses you wanted to wear in high school too. Thank you for following along this journey and watching. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to give this video a thumbs up. Please remember to subscribe for more content.